Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 726 for September 20th, 2018. Coming up in just a few minutes.
It's a little bit difficult to put in words how special a day it is to finally be upon opening. But I guess, surreal is a way to put it.
It took more than 4 years of brush clearing and construction work, but what was once the Old Taylor Distillery in Kentucky officially opened to the public Wednesday as the new Castle and Key Distillery. Distilling began at the end of 2016 at the site along McCracken Pike, a few miles north of Woodford Reserve, on the banks of Glens Creek. But it took almost 2 more years to get things fixed up to the point where Will Arvin and Wes Murray were ready to let the public have a look. They hired Marianne Eaves away from Brown-Forman to be their master distiller, and she'll join us later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. We'll also have the calendar of events, your voice, the What I'm Tasting This Week department, and much more, all on the midweek episode of WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot-still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
This is whiskey, Johnny Walker's Scotch whiskey, from this place and these people, aye, Scotch makers, creating the bold and complex flavour of Johnny Walker Black Label. Step right up.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by Highland Park. We'll begin with a big shakeup in bourbon country that affects 3 of Kentucky's major distillers. Tuesday, Beam Suntory-owned Maker's Mark announced that it has lured Heaven Hill master distiller Denny Potter back to Loretto, where he spent 7 years working under former master distillers Dave Pickerel and Kevin Smith. He'll become master distiller and general manager for Maker's Mark on October 1st. Current master distiller Greg Davis and vice president of operations Victoria McRae Samuels are both being promoted to new positions within Beam Suntory. Greg Davis will become director of distilling for the Jim Beam Distillery and the Booker No Distilleries, while Victoria McRae Samuels will move to Beam Suntory's Global Innovation Center in Claremont, Kentucky, right next to the Jim Beam Distillery. She will become the company's senior director for quality control worldwide. Now, Denny Potter's move came as a bit of a shock. He became the first non-Beam family member to hold the title of master distiller at Heaven Hill back in 2014. And last year he was named vice president of operations, overseeing all of Heaven Hill's production facilities in Kentucky and Texas. Now, Denny has not been available for interviews, but told me in an email Tuesday night that it was a very tough decision. He said, and I'm quoting now, "I love Heaven Hill, and I have always loved Maker's Mark since I left back in 2010. It feels right to go back." He left the distillery in 2010 when Beam transferred him to its Cruzan rum distillery in the U.S. Virgin Islands. In an email, Heaven Hill spokesman Josh Hafer said his colleagues are happy for Denny, and while there is no decision yet on who will take over, the company will look for someone who can, quote, maintain the traditions of our previous master distillers, including a commitment to heritage, quality, authenticity, and transparency. We should also note that Maker's Mark did announce another promotion as well. Jane Bowie has been a key part of the distillery's Private Select program for some time now, and was named to lead that program along with the Diplomat program at Maker's Mark. Friday marks 2 weeks since union workers at Kentucky's Four Roses Distillery walked off the job after rejecting the company's contract offer. Friday also marks the first time the two sides have sat down at the bargaining table since the strike began on September 7th. While Four Roses executives continue to decline interview requests, the distillery issued a statement this week outlining its key points in the contract talks. The Kieran-owned distillery is denying reports that it wants a two-tier wage scale for new hires and dropped a proposal to limit vacation time for new hires to 5 weeks after 25 years of service instead of the current 6 weeks. However, it does want to change the way new employees build up sick time. Right now, employees get 10 sick days each year and can carry over unused sick days from year to year with a maximum of 60 days in their bank. The distillery wants to end that banking of sick days and provide new hires with short-term disability insurance that would kick in after an employee's 10 sick days are used up. Four Roses executives believe that plan is actually better for new employees than the current plan, but United Food and Commercial Workers Local 10D President Jeff Royalty is standing firm in opposition.
Our sick days is 1 8-hour day of full pay. This short-term disability, it kicks in from day 11 to day 90, if I'm not mistaken. But that's only at like 50% pay. So essentially, I would have to be on short-term disability for 120 days to even break even if I had the 60 days banked. And the things they don't want to tell you, for instance, if we went the new route with those guys and you have the 10 sick days and then short term, you creel an ankle or something happens to you and you're off for 10 days. At that point, you can go on your short term. But what happens to you when winter hits and you catch the flu or a bad sinus infection and you just need 1 day off or maybe 2 days off? That's where those accrued sick days came in really handy. With the short term, you can't really apply for 1 day of short-term disability.
Once again, Four Roses executives have declined our requests for interviews since the beginning of the strike, which is why you have only heard from union leaders here on WhiskyCast. We have given Four Roses a standing invitation to come on the show and explain their side of the labor disagreement. That said, the UFCW's Jeff Royalty is hoping Friday's talks can lead to significant progress in ending the strike.
I'm losing money personally every day I'm on the picket line, but so is Four Roses. And, a strike is no good for either side, but it's one of those things that just has to be done from time to time. But honestly, I have high hopes that we can get with those guys Friday. The common sense factor tells me that the only way we can resolve this is get back to the table and start talking about it.
The strike has not had any impact on production since the distillery has been closed, while final construction work is underway on a $55 million expansion project. Bottling workers at the Four Roses facility in Cox's Creek, Kentucky, are not part of the strike, though operations and maintenance workers there are walking the picket lines. In other news, Buffalo Trace has unveiled this year's antique collection lineup. There is one big change this year. The Eagle Rare 17-year-old is being given a boost. It'll now be bottled at 50.5% ABV from now on, instead of the 45% that it's been bottled at for many years now. That's being done to return the Eagle Rare 17 to the original strength that Eagle Rare was bottled at when it was launched in 1974. This year's George T. Stagg comes from barrels filled back in 2003 and is bottled at 62.45% ABV. The William LaRue Weller bourbon was distilled in 2006. It's bottled at 62.85% ABV. And the Thomas H. Handy Sazerac Rye was distilled in 2012. It checks in at a whopping 64.4% ABV. This year's collection is rounded out, as always, with the 18-year-old Sazerac Rye. This year's edition was distilled in 1998. All five will be out over the next few weeks with a recommended retail price of $99.99 each. We'll have tasting notes for them soon at whiskycast.com. In Scotland, Glenmorangie has released the third whiskey in its Bondhouse No. 1 collection. The Grand Vintage Malt 1993 was first matured for 10 years in ex-bourbon barrels, then given 15 more years in Bual Madeira casks. It's the first one in the Bondhouse collection to be available exclusively in travel retail, and it'll sell for around $675 a bottle. Tomatin is releasing 2 new Kubakan vintages. Kubakan is Tomatin's peated single malt. There's a 1990 vintage matured in ex-bourbon barrels that were first used on Islay, along with a 2003 vintage using ex-sherry casks that were also first used on Islay. Tomatin started distilling its own peated malt in 2005, and that's the whiskey that goes into the regular Kubakan expression. The 2003 vintage will carry a recommended retail price of £85. That's around $112 a bottle, while the 1990 vintage will sell for around £230, about $300 a bottle. Now, last time around, we mentioned the trademark dispute that kept mixed martial arts champion Conor McGregor from naming his new Irish whiskey Notorious. Well, Monday morning, just a few hours after that episode went live, McGregor's camp unveiled the new name for his whiskey. Proper number 12 comes from Dublin 12, the postal district on Dublin's southwest side, where McGregor grew up in the Crumlin neighborhood. The whiskey itself is a blend of Irish single malt and grain whiskies created by Bushmills distiller David Elder. McGregor's Airborne Spirits is working with Proximo Spirits on the project. Both Bushmills and Proximo are owned by Beckley, the holding company for Mexico's Beckman family of Jose Cuervo fame. However, a spokesperson for the brand in the U.S. says there is no whiskey from Bushmills in that blend. The source of the whiskeys, though, is not being disclosed. It'll be available at first in the U.S. and Ireland, with wider availability next year. There's no word on pricing, but McGregor has pledged to donate $1 million each year from sales of Proper Number 12 to charities supporting first responders. And on that note, McGregor's return to the Octagon is scheduled for October 6th in Las Vegas, where he'll fight current UFC champion Khabib Nurmagomedov. There's a news conference with the two fighters to hype the fight today, the 20th, and we should note that we're recording this podcast before that news conference. That's because the online betting site BetDSI is offering prop bets on the news conference, and they're pretty sure that McGregor will talk about Proper Number 12 at some point. You'd have to bet $500 up front on his doing it just to win $10 in profits, plus your $500 back, while a $10 bet on him not mentioning the brand would pay you $200 if you're right. The odds makers figure it's less obvious that he'll drink some of his whiskey during the news conference. You'd have to bet $10 up front on his doing it to win $15 in profits, while you'd have to risk $19 just to win $10 if he doesn't. And there is one loophole here. They posted the prop bets based on him saying Proper 12, not Proper Number 12, which is the official brand name. Depending on just how he says it, when he says it, and we know he's going to, that could affect the way the bets get paid out. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. The news is brought to you by Highland Park, the Orkney single malt with Viking soul. Look for the latest release in the Viking Legends series. Valknut is inspired by the Viking heritage and mythology of Orkney, and it has a bit of Orkney's own peat and locally grown barley in every glass. You'll find it at a good whiskey shop near you, and find out more about the entire lineup at highlandparkwhiskey.com. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events. Tickets are still available for Bourbon and Beyond this weekend at Champions Park in Louisville. We'll have special coverage this weekend on WhiskyCast. Art Begg's Ultimate Escape Tour is heading to the U.S. East Coast with tour stops in the Philadelphia area this weekend. We have the tour schedule through the end of October on our calendar at the website right now. Amrut's American Tour continues this coming week with a tasting and dinner in Palo Alto, California on the 25th and a set of tastings at the Jack Rose Dining Saloon in Washington, D.C. on the 29th. The Craft Distilling Expo is September 26th and 27th at London's Old Truman Brewery, followed by the Whiskey Show in London the 28th through the 30th. The Whiskey Shop in Dufton, Scotland has its annual Autumn Whiskey Festival September 27th through October 1st. Teeling Whiskey Company in Dublin has its Dublin Rising, the Culture Edition, October 4th. And the Nashville Whiskey Festival is on October 6th in Nashville, Tennessee. Right now, we have 239 different events on our searchable calendar at whiskycast.com. Just use the search button to find one near you or wherever you're traveling in the near future.
This is whiskey. Johnny Walker's Scotch whiskey from this place and these places in that place. These are the people that make it, aging in oak for 12 long years. See, the land that shapes these people and the people that shape this whiskey all shape how bloody good it tastes. Bold as it is complex, for every step you take, this is Johnny Walker Black Label, friends. Step right up. Can I drink this now?
Johnny Walker Black Label Blended Scotch Whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume, imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin. It has been 46 years since the gates closed at the Old Taylor Distillery in Kentucky for what was long thought to be the final time. Over the years, what was once Colonel E. H. Taylor's castle-like showplace on McCracken Pike crumbled and rotted as nature reclaimed its hold on the site. I stopped at the distillery on a Sunday morning in March of 2012 to have a look around, and it clearly looked like I was one of the few people that actually paid attention for the most part to the no trespassing signs. I only walked about 50 feet into the weeds and trees and managed to avoid the poison ivy, though I did not avoid the sheriff's deputy who just happened to drive by at the wrong time. More about that later. Back then, though, the thought that whiskey might once again be distilled on the site was quickly laughed off as a fantasy. Even one of the bourbon industry's biggest optimists, Kentucky Distillers Association President Eric Gregory, wasn't holding out any hope back then. He was quoted as saying the first thing anyone hoping to revive Old Taylor would have to do is start with a tanker truck full of Roundup weed killer. Now, we should note that it's a good thing Will Arvin and Wes Murray did not listen to any of that. They formed Peristyle LLC and bought the Old Taylor site in 2014 and started clearing decades of what can best be described as 113 acres of accumulated crap on the banks of Glens Creek. A year later, they hired Marianne Eaves. Back then she was known as Marianne Barnes. They hired her away from Brown Forman and gave her the title of Master Distiller for what would eventually become known as Castle and Key Distillery, since the Old Taylor name is a Buffalo Trace trademark. At the end of 2016, with the distillery itself ready to go, Marianne started laying down stocks of whiskey. But there was still a lot of work left to do on the surrounding grounds. You see, distilleries have become much more than just a place to make whiskey these days, especially when there's as much history as this site has, with the Colonel's old sunken gardens, springhouse, and, of course, the castle right along McCracken Pike. Those spaces have the potential to host weddings, meetings, and all kinds of other special events that bring in money to pay the bills while the whiskey matures. It has taken almost 2 more years, but now that restoration work is complete, and Wednesday, Castle and Key officially opened to the public for tours. Now, a while back, Marianne told me that she wanted to wait on doing an interview for WhiskyCast until they were ready to open. That time has come. This has to be a really big week for you, Marianne, after 3 years for you, 4 for your partners at the distillery in getting that place turned from what it was for many, many years to what it is today. What's it mean to you?
It's a little bit difficult to put in words how special a day it is to finally be upon opening. But I guess, surreal is a way to put it. But we are also just so proud of what we've accomplished, and it's also a little bit humbling, all of the opportunity and the reception that we've gotten just over the past week, having people come in and see the site, a little preview before we open the doors fully.
Give us a sense, for those who did not see what the Old Taylor Distillery looked like in 2014 compared to Castle and Key Distillery today. What was it like the first time you saw the place?
When I first came out, it was the end of December in 2014, or middle of December in 2014, and it was snowy, so that covered up a little bit of the ruin there. But I was walking around, and you could tell that it was a place that people had really cared for, but it had just been so neglected. Walked into the distillery itself, and the roof was starting to collapse. The windows were all broken in. It was just covered in trash, and paint was chipping everywhere. It was dirty and dark, and kind of scary being in there because you didn't know what might be around the next corner, with nature taking over the way that it had, in the broken windows, vines were intruding into the building. So it looked like a place that it had, once been important, but then like the jungle just tried to reclaim it. The site itself wasn't as bad when I first saw it as when Will and Wes first came. So they purchased the site in April of 2014. So about 7 months, 8 months before I got to see it. And they had been working hard on the exterior. So clearing the site, even around the springhouse and down in the sunken garden, they were starting to work with John Karloftis on planning for putting the garden design together. And the sunken garden actually had already been completed. They had put that plan together and brought that vision to life back in the fall. I think they completed it in August or September of 2014. And that was, something that struck me. I understood that they weren't making progress in the distillery. However, they were making progress in the plans because they wanted to make a place on the property where people could physically walk through their vision. And that may sound kind of strange, but having been there when the distillery was in such disrepair, that people were so afraid by it that it was left sitting for nearly half a century, that to walk through the garden, to feel like you've been transported back in time and to another place in the world, to Europe, really spoke to me. I was like, now I see what these guys really want to do with the place. You can see it on paper and you can hear them speak, but to actually walk through it and then experience it for yourself, I think was able to help a lot of people understand really what they were trying to do. So it's changed a lot since then.
Now, you've been distilling for a while. while all the visitors, attractions, and everything else gets restored. What have you been distilling, and what are you laying down for the future?
We started our distilling operations in November of 2016, and we started with bourbon. Our bourbon recipe is 73% white corn, 10% rye, and 17% barley. We also make a wheat recipe with 10% wheat, and we are making rye whiskey as well. Trying to source as many of our grains as possible from Kentucky. We're buying, the majority of our grains from Walnut Grove Farm, and then what they don't have for us, because they're still increasing their supply of some of the grains that aren't grown here often. We have had to source from outside of the state. So our rye whiskey recipe is made mostly with Kentucky grown rye at 63%, and then 17% yellow corn and 20% malted barley. Our recipes were inspired by a sample of bourbon, a bottle of bourbon that was distilled by Colonel Taylor in 1917, but then left in the warehouses through Prohibition after Colonel Taylor passed, and then bottled after Prohibition ended in 1933. It was really inspiring to me tasting that bottle for the first time with my partners, Will and Wes. I had never tasted Old Taylor bourbon. It was a party that we had at my partner Wes's house after I accepted the position. So we were celebrating, and I have to be honest, I didn't expect much. I had antique whiskey before, and a lot of times it just tastes old. There are unique characteristics that you'll find in older whiskeys, but this Old Taylor bourbon was something really special. You could taste a butterscotch note that was very dominant, and the quality of it was just really, you could tell it was really expertly distilled. So we used that and we had it analyzed, and that's when we confirmed the general ratios and the specific grains that we would use for our recipes. So white corn is not common in bourbon production, but we decided we wanted to do that to honor Colonel Taylor's recipe because he said that he preferred white corn, but also for the flavor differences. So before we actually started producing a full-scale production, I was in the laboratory making, hundreds of batches, a liter at a time, to try and figure out what our ratios would be and which yeast strains we would use, and discovered that white corn is just not quite as corny as yellow corn. It's not the particular strain that we're using is not tremendously sweeter. It just it's got a different taste completely. So we were really excited by the new distillate that we've been producing using that white corn, and even just a year and a half, the youngest or the oldest barrels we have in the warehouse at the moment. We're really encouraged by the flavor profile and how everything's coming along.
When might we see a Castle and Key bourbon bottled?
Castle and Key bourbon will likely hit the shelf sometime around 2022, 2021. We started distilling in November of 2016, started barreling the next month in December of 2016. So the earliest that we could possibly see any would be December of 2020. However, it wouldn't be enough to make any significant entrance into the market. So we're just going to hold off. And, another thing is that we're not holding ourselves to any particular timeline because we want to make sure that the flavor is right. I've tasted a select number of barrels out in the warehouse. There's still a little bit of work to do to get a marker and how everything is maturing. So most likely it'll be 2021.
What are you bottling in the meantime, though, to keep the bills paid and the doors open? I think you've been doing some gin and vodkas and stuff like that, right?
That's right, Mark. We've been doing gin and vodka. Our gin and vodka is actually produced. It's redistilled from our bourbon whiskey and rye whiskey new make. So we take our 135 proof new make off the doubler and we send it straight back in. We distill it up to 190 plus proof, 191 proof off of our 17-inch stainless column still. and we do a significant heads and tails cut because we want it to be really clean. And then when we want to make gin, we take that great vodka that we've produced and we send that back through. So we put that back into the same copper doubler, and we'll drop it down to around 145, 150 proof, and then distill it up to 180 through our botanical recipe, which is 7 Kentucky native botanicals and then juniper.
From what I hear, you've also actually opened the place up to some contract work. I hear Jim Rutledge is hanging out there a lot these days.
Yeah, we see Jim pretty often. He is working in collaboration with our partner from Louisville, Brooke Smith. Their project is really exciting to us, the way that it's going to help. It's such a worthy pursuit. And, of course, it's nice just having Jim hanging around because of his knowledge and all that he has to offer our team to grow, and his perspective and how he produces, rub off on us a little bit. But we have been doing quite a bit of contract production. For some folks, we just take the recipe and the parameters that they want to use, and we'll produce it for them, to the letter. And then for others, they've asked that I would create the recipe for them. So several of our contracts are recipes that I developed based on flavor characteristics that they were trying to pursue. And then we're making it in the way that I prescribed. So it's, a nice balance of doing things that are creative and also just making great quality whiskey for our partners in the industry who maybe don't have the capacity to do enough for themselves. The contract production that we have signed up for really helps us to put more whiskey, more bourbon and rye whiskey away for ourselves. So we're excited about the partnerships that we have, the opportunities to fill our capacity and even invest in some growth in our production capabilities. And, we're a one-stop shop. So we distill, we barrel and age, and then we can also bottle once it's ready.
I've asked this question to a number of distillers before, but what did it feel like when you saw that very first new make coming off the still that you guys had distilled at Castle and Key? What did it feel like?
That was a really exciting day. We started up that still for the first time. It was my first time, building a distillery, doing a historic renovation of a site such as this. And, we were really blown away by what it tasted like. It's a common thing, the first batch that comes off the still is never exactly what you hope it's going to be, but it's way better than we thought it was going to be, which it was still good. But the efforts that we had gone to get all of the distillery put together, the specifics that I added to our equipment to make it operate for us and in our recipes and our specific processes and the flexibility and variability that I wanted to have in the process was really exciting to see actually up and flowing through the first time. I think it was pride and also relief that it was coming out okay. And also, the start of something. And a lot of people say, well, you're finished now. You've closed one chapter in the book. But it really is the starting line. So, from that point, we just continued to improve and things got better and better.
I mentioned a few minutes ago that back in 2012, a local sheriff's deputy caught me taking photos on the Old Taylor property. He let me off with a warning, but strongly suggested that I take a look at a tiny cemetery across the road from the distillery. The reason? Sergeant Joshua McQueen of the 13th Virginia Infantry is buried there. He fought in the Revolutionary War under General George Washington and lived out his days along the banks of Glens Creek until his death in 1853. Back in July, I posted a photo of Sergeant McQueen's gravesite On our social media feeds for the 4th of July, the American flags next to the headstone were tattered and torn back in 2012, and there were leaves and branches all over the place. Fortunately, that is not the case anymore. Marianne Eaves told me the distillery has taken on the task of maintaining that little cemetery next to their parking lot. The fence has been fixed, the debris removed, and Sergeant McQueen and the handful of other people buried in that little cemetery can rest peacefully once again. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Lagavulin, the legendary Islay single malt. Look for the classic Lagavulin 16-year-old, the Distillers Edition, the throwback 8-year-old Lagavulin, and on the way, this year's edition of the cask strength Lagavulin 12-year-old. Find out more at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. Let's start off with the first release of New Riff Bourbon. We had New Riff founder Ken Lewis on the show in July, in episode 712, and his Bottled in Bond bourbon made its debut Monday night at a tasting in New York City. As with all Bottled in Bond whiskeys, it's bottled at 50% ABV, and this 4-year-old bourbon has an aromatic, peppery nose with a good balance of caramel, pipe tobacco, honey, and vanilla notes underneath, along with just a hint of cherries. The taste, well, it's spicy with hints of cinnamon and black pepper on top of caramel candy, vanilla, honey, and hints of cherries and butterscotch. A few drops of water opens it up nicely with notes of apricots and dried fruits. And the finish is good and long with hints of caramel, dark chocolate, and cherries. It's an excellent debut, and I'm scoring the New Riff Bourbon a 91. Australia's Starward Distillery in Melbourne is now exporting its single malts to the U.S. I sat down with founder David Vitale on Monday for an interview that you'll hear on an upcoming episode of WhiskyCast, and got to taste the Starward Nova. As with all of the Starward single malts, it's matured in wine casks, in this case red wine casks from the southern coast of Australia, and it's bottled at 41% ABV. It's only 2 years old, though, and while that might be a bit young for other whiskeys, it works with the climate in Melbourne that's more like Kentucky than it is Tasmania or Scotland. The nose on this one is light and fruity with notes of strawberries, raspberries, and dried flowers. The taste is tart and fruity with fresh berries, a hint of spice, dried flowers, red apples, caramel candy, and just a hint of grape tannins. The finish is long, fruity, and tart with a subtle touch of baking spices, and I'm scoring the Starward Nova Australian single malt a 91. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, our tasting notes are brought to you by the folks at Heaven Hill Distillery. They're proud to announce the 2018 edition of Parker's Heritage Collection. This year's edition carries on Parker Beam's legacy of excellence and innovation with a unique bourbon finished in orange Curacao barrels that accent the bourbon's own natural hints of citrus. Once again, sales of this year's edition of the Parker's Heritage Collection will benefit the ALS Association. Find out more at heavenhilldistillery.com. Think wisely, drink wisely. Now, I mentioned Amrut's American tour during the calendar of events, and there's a new whiskey to go along with that tour. In this case, it's the first ever Amrut, or Indian single malt for that matter, finished in Portuguese Madeira wine casks. There is no age statement on this one, but it is bottled at 50% ABV. The nose is amazingly fruity and vibrant with notes of peaches, apricots, almond oil, toffee, vanilla, and a hint of toasted coconut. The taste has a great balance of fruitiness and spice with hints of clove, orange marmalade, peaches, apricots, almond oil, and toffee. And the finish is long and fruity with hints of orange marmalade and toffee, too. It's excellent, And I'm scoring the Amrut Limited Edition Madeira cask finish a 93. And let's wind things up with the 2018 Old Forester Birthday Bourbon. This year's edition was distilled in 2006 and bottled at 50.5% ABV, which makes it the strongest edition of the birthday bourbon yet. That is not apparent, though, on the nose, which is nice and aromatic with notes of orange peel, caramel, pipe tobacco, black cherries, muted spices, and just a whiff of almonds. The taste is fruity with green apples, lemon zest, and a soft, gradual buildup of ginger root and allspice notes, along with hints of honey and green tea in the background. The finish is long and subtle with touches of green tea, honey, and just a hint of mint leaves. I'm scoring the Old Forester 2018 Birthday Bourbon a 92. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of 2,300 different whiskeys from around the world. You'll find it at WhiskyCast.com.
Redbreast fans have always cherished our whiskey's sherry notes, so we set out to embellish that character. Introducing the Redbreast Listowel edition, a quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey finished in first fill Oloroso sherry casks from Spain's prestigious Bodegas Listowel. Carrying Redbreast's trademark pot still spices and dark dried fruit notes, the Listowel edition is graced with an enduring sherry finish that would be better described as a final act. Discover the newest branch on the Redbreast family tree.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, brought to you by Lot 40. We have already had a couple of comments come in after the story of Conor McGregor's new Proper No. 12 Irish whiskey went up on WhiskyCast.com. Joe Kim posted this note on our Facebook page. I never seem to like the celebrity brands, and they almost never last. Where will the celebrity be in 10 years? And will the brand ever make a 25-year single malt? Rather spend money on both new and old brands that are in it for the whiskey, not the quick buck. And Jeff Hammer brought the snark with this response. Perhaps proceeds can go towards anger management classes. You may recall McGregor's incident in New York City a few months ago, in which he attacked a bus full of other UFC fighters, and not only forced a few changes on that upcoming card after causing some injuries, but spent a short amount of time in the custody of New York City police before pleading to reduced charges. Now, Mike Simpson tweeted this question the other day. Have you sampled many whiskey liqueurs? If so, do you enjoy? I think they have a time and place for sampling. This is a fave of mine currently. And Mike included a photo of Irish Mist. As I told Mike on Twitter, I'm going to admit that I am not the biggest fan of whiskey liqueurs. There are some that are pretty good, such as Bushmills Irish Honey, but my issue with most whiskey liqueurs and flavored whiskeys in general is that there is so much stuff added to them that the whiskey flavor gets buried underneath all the fruit and spices. The Bushmills Irish Honey dialed all of that stuff back a bit so that the whiskey was still obvious, and that's why I give it credit. Now, if you like whiskey liqueurs, that's great. We can always agree to disagree on some things. Meanwhile, if you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always post it on the Your Voice page at WhiskyCast.com or get in touch with us on social media. We're always around Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Tumblr at WhiskyCast. And the email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Lot 40, Canada's 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Let's wrap things up now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and other stuff that makes whiskey unique. That last question from Mike about whiskey liqueurs brings up a good question. With all of the flavored whiskeys we've seen on the market these days, just what is the difference between a whiskey liqueur and a flavored whiskey? Well, it all boils down to technicalities. For instance, if a U.S. distiller wants to add flavorings to a whiskey, they can, up to a certain point. There are limits here. 1, if they do, they can't call it a straight whiskey. And 2, flavorings can't make up more than 2.5% of the final product by weight. Now, flavored whiskey is a separate category altogether under federal regulations in the U.S. It can have natural flavorings added, but the label has to specify the predominant flavor, such as Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey or Fireball Cinnamon Whiskey. By the way, those flavored whiskeys are the exception to the general rule that whiskeys have to be bottled at a minimum of 40% ABV, or 80 proof. They can be bottled as low as 30% ABV, or 60 proof. And if those drinks are exported outside of the U.S. to the European Union, they get labeled as spirit drinks. So, what is a whiskey liqueur, such as, for instance, Drambuie? Well, it is similar to a flavored whiskey in that there are fruits, spices, or other flavorings added. But they also have to add sugar, and that sugar has to be at least 2.5% of the final volume by weight. That's the simplest way of explaining the difference. If you have something you'd like us to look at on Behind the Label, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. That's also where you'll find links for the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel podcast and our WhiskyCast HD videos, along with the latest whiskey news, events, photos, tasting notes, and much more, including a complete archive of all of our past episodes. I hope you'll take just a minute to share WhiskyCast with a friend. You can even show them how to find the podcast app on their smartphone and discover a whole world of free content, including WhiskyCast. Remember, friends don't let friends miss out on podcasts. You'll find our Cask Strength conversation throughout the week on the usual social media platforms. Just look for us at WhiskyCast. And if you're the anti-social media type, well, our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
This is whiskey, Johnny Walker's Scotch whiskey, from this place and these people, aye, Scotch makers, creating the bold and complex flavour of Johnny Walker Black Label. Step right up.
WhiskyCast. Brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2018, and comes to you twice each week from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.